Welcome to today's episode of the Capstone Conversation. I am your host, Jared Asch, and today we are going to cover Alameda and Contra Costa and 130,000 acres of open space through the East Bay Parks District. We have John Mercurio and Colin Coffey, who are on the board of directors for the East Bay Parks. Before we start today's episode, I just want to say thank you for everybody for listening. We are 52 weeks in, more than 70 guests altogether. I really appreciate everybody who's participated. Giving me feedback on LinkedIn, telling me they've heard about it on the podcast. And I want to thank really all my listeners for being there. My wife, my mother, my sister, my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law. Okay, none of them actually listen. There's the guy in Lithuania. Thank you to him for listening. Thank you, everybody, for being part of this, whether you're listening once a month or every week. I really just appreciate you being here with me. I look forward to year 2. If you have any suggestions for other speakers, ideas, conversations, please give me a shout, hit me on LinkedIn, or email me. I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Please share this podcast with a friend. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
First, tell us a little bit about East Bay Parks, what they do and how they serve our community. And then tell us a little bit more about each of yourselves and your background.
I can do the stats for it. You're right, we are close to 130,000 acres, getting pretty close to that, which is split among 73 parks. We also are responsible for managing 55 miles of bay shoreline, extending from the southern boundary of Alameda County all the way up and around past the Carquinez Strait to Oakley. So we have a lot of shoreline parks. We have well over 1,300 miles of trail, and we serve a population of 2.8 million people. And just to put that in perspective, that's bigger than 25 states. It's a significant agency with a lot of folks depending on us for open space and parks and for protecting the environment. That agency is governed by a board of 7 members who each represent about 400,000 people. That's how we govern the park district.
The 2 counties, Alameda and Contra Costa, are covered by 7 of us on an elected board, as John pointed out. My own ward is northern Contra Costa, extending from Hercules all the way out to Brentwood and the Bay and Delta shoreline in between.
Colin's got Ward 7. I've got Ward 6, which is basically Clayton, Concord, Pleasant Hill, and Walnut Creek. Most of Walnut Creek south to the county line. So that includes San Ramon Valley. And then over to the east to include Byron and Discovery Bay.
John and I are the 2 members on the elected board that reside in Contra Costa County. 4 of our colleagues reside in Alameda County. And my own background is associated with the Park District for about 20 years. I was appointed in 2001 to the Park Advisory Committee, which is the equivalent of a planning commission to a city. The Park Advisory Committee hears the annual budget of the park district. It passed advice along to the board of directors on new parklands and land use plans for existing parklands, and it passes advice to the board of directors on new rules and regulations for the park. I served on it for 13 years. John served on it for quite a number of years.
I served on it for 17 years.
So we're both graduates of the District Park Advisory Committee. My wife and I have been at-large docents for the Park District for about 15 years. About 8 years ago, I was elevated by appointment to the board of directors when my predecessor, Diane Burgess, was elected to the Contra Costa Board of Supervisors.
My background, as Colin mentioned, is a lot of years on the Park Advisory Committee, but also many years as a trails and parks and open space advocate and a Parks Recreation and Open Space Commissioner in Concord, as well as a planning commission here in Concord, and about 35 years of work advocating for trails and also being involved in volunteer work, building and maintaining trails. I have been interested in this for a really long time. The prior board member that represents my ward, Beverly Lane, was on the board for 28 years, an extremely distinguished service to the people and to the district. She retired, and I decided to run for that seat and was elected in 2022. So I'm one of the new folks on the board.
We're both retired pretty much from our pre-existing day jobs. And at this point, we're both pretty much full-time park guys.
It's a lot of fun, though. It's a lot of work, a lot of fun.
That it is.
That's great. The first big question here is, what is the difference between a state park, the East Bay parks, and our city parks? Most people don't necessarily know. They think a park is a park. In my experience, we were talking earlier, I have a background, for those of you on the YouTube, that you could see I have Mount Diablo. That is a state park. Definitely needs a lot of work and is underfunded. Can you guys talk a little bit about what the differences are?
Yeah, I'll start off with that, and then I think Colin probably has some points that he'd like to make. But I guess the first thing you can say is the park district is locally controlled. We have our revenue comes from the Alameda and Contra Costa County. We get 90% of our revenue from property tax. So we're in control of our own destiny when it comes to funding. Whereas a state park, they have to rely on the governor's budget and the state legislature and the problems that the state of California has from time to time, where it's a kind of a boom and bust type thing. I think a lot of folks watching this podcast already know that. That creates some issues for them. A system that is much larger than ours and has different governing than we do. But then you've got all the cities around the county that in the two counties that also have parks. And the parks are just one thing that they do. For us, it's all we do. We're a special district dedicated to running this park and open space system. And so we're able to focus just on a relatively narrow focus, and to me, a benefit. There's also open space out there that is operated by the water district. So Contra Costa Water District, East Bay Mud, and San Francisco Public Utilities all have open space within the boundaries of the two counties. And some of our trails go through that land, and people a lot of times don't even end up doing that. But those are other agencies that are also providing open space to folks.
That question quite a bit too, Jared, because people aren't quite sure what the East Bay parks are in terms of who's operating them. I will get questions as to whether Tillman Park is a state park, is it a county park, are we the city? That consistently comes up in questioning that we get when we're doing tabling and we're out and about. And it gets to what is the real unique status or the East Bay Regional Park System, unique to the two counties, Contra Costa and Alameda. In fact, it's unique to the state of California and truly unique to most country. And that is in the hierarchy that John described. You ordinarily in a region have perhaps federal and federally operated parklands and open space. You have a state park, and then you have county parks in that hierarchy and municipal parks. So Alameda and Contra Costa don't have county parks in terms of their traditional county park system. Every other county in the state of California has a county park department that operates the larger regional parks and trail system. In Contra Costa and Alameda, there are two counties combined and operate one park system under the rubric of the East Bay Regional Park District. And the uniqueness, and it really is attributed to me as the genius of the founders of the park district back in the early 1930s, Major Tilden, Aurelia Reinhardt, and the community activists that wanted to preserve the Berkeley, Oakland, Richmond Hills. They didn't want to just operate these open spaces as city parks or county parks, state county parks, or often subject to the benefits and detriments of county revenues or state revenues and the ups and downs. The folks who founded the park district decided that they would go to Sacramento, get a independent park agency created for Contra Costa and Alameda counties with its own elected board and its own tax base, unique again to the East Bay and California. In fact, the country is you have this large regional park system with its own tax base and its own elected board with a focus just on parks and trails in the East Bay. And we've truly benefited and to this day enjoy the fruit of that decision by the founders back in the 30s to create this large regional agency.
And just to clarify, Colin wasn't calling himself the genius. He was calling the founders of the park system the geniuses.
The genius of the organization that they created back in the 30s.
I love history, and we're actually celebrating our 90th anniversary this year. We've had a number of events across the park district. The district there was an election in 1934, and if you know anything about history, 1934 was a pretty terrible year for America in terms of economics. There were a lot of people out of work, and that was probably right around the time of the bottom of the Great Depression. Some movers and shakers in the East Bay were concerned that land that was being made available for development by the water district up in the Berkeley, Oakland Hills could be developed. And they thought that would be a major detriment. They got this put on the ballot, and I think it was 71% rate to create this park district. And so we're really proud of that history. And then it's only grown from the early parks were Tilden, Sibley, Redwood, and Temescal. That's where it started, and it's just gone out from there. I just wanted to mention, while we're talking about the 90th year, we had a giant party in May at Lake Chabot with over 6,000 people attended. And to celebrate our 90th anniversary, we had lots of booths and lots of entertainment, lots of cultural activities going on. It was a tremendous thing. That was the main event. We're going to continue to have events. We had a great event at Thurgood Marshall Regional Park, home of the Port Chicago 50 for Martin Luther King Day. And we also have the calendar that we put out every year. There's this very nice scenic calendar that we do. This year, it was a history calendar. And so many great photos from our archive showing the past activities in the parks.
Cool. We're going to talk about hidden gems in the parks coming up. But before we do that, I want to follow along this. You have 2 different counties, and you talked about the board. There's 2 of 7 of you in Contra Costa and 5 in Alameda County, but they only have 400,000 people more according to the most recent census. How is that evenly divided?
So some of the directors who live in Alameda County actually have part of Contra Costa in their wards. So, going from Oakland over to Rossmore is a ward, and going from Oakland, Berkeley up into Richmond is another ward. 2 of the wards have 2 counties.
Okay. And are there differences that come up related to that? Or no, it really does just mesh and then merge together?
I've never really, I don't think what county we live in really makes that.
I think the county is distinct, other than John and I do perhaps have our own history that are very thoroughly associated with Contra Costa County. And I think it's important for the board to be diverse in its representation, not only in terms of county representation, but in terms of regional representations. A number of our wards, at least 3 of them, 4 of them, as I look at the map, are predominantly on the San Francisco Bay, or have prominent portions of their wards on the San Francisco Bay. My ward significantly covers a lot of the Delta shoreline, and John's out in the far eastern end of his ward. We each probably are more influenced by the regions we represent rather than per se the county.
That's good feedback. Let's talk about the Naval Weapons Station. That is your newest park. You guys are building it out. Talk about that and talk about the experience of getting to this is the by far the most recent park, right? Probably in 30 years on the board. How many other parks have you been there to fully develop?
It is a current development project for us to improve it to the point where it can be a park. That is part of what used to be the Concord Naval Weapons Station, and it's basically half of that. We got 2,500 acres dedicated to us from the National Park Service at no charge. And this is the land that is on the hills that are on the edge of Concord and the edge of the Naval Weapons Station that go up to the Pittsburgh border. We have all that land there, and we have plans to do it a certain amount of development there in terms of how to make it a park that folks will be able to enjoy. Part of it will be a new visitor center, which is going to utilize a repurposed industrial building, old Naval Weapons Station, and it's going to be jointly staffed with the National Park Service to help us primarily tell the story of the 1944 Port Chicago explosion, the disaster, the largest World War II home front disaster, where 320 workers at the base there on the shoreline loading ships died. And most of those were African Americans. Since there's a story there that needs to be told. Those sailors, when it came time to go back to work, many of them did not want to go back to work because there were no changes made to the safety. They were forced to work too quickly, and there were not the proper safety protocols being followed. And so they refused to go back to work, and they were charged with mutiny. Story will be told in the visitor center, because to go to the location of that explosion currently requires security clearances because it's an active military port. They still load ships there from the railroad to the ships. There's a lot of security there. So we'll be able to commemorate that and explain it on the land side and have National Park Service folks there to help us with that. I think that more than likely that visitor center will also be telling the story of the Native Americans in the area, as well as the ranching history. It's going to be a great resource. There'll be programs run out of there, and it will be located very close to the new development on the other 2,500 acres that the city of Concord is responsible for, convening to the North Concord BART station. We're really excited about that. $3 million has been secured so far to begin the work of designing that facility, to design how we can repurpose this building. That came from the good work of Congressman Mark DeSaulnier, secure that money for us, and it enables us to get going and get started on that. Now, there's a whole nother part of the park on the other side of Bailey Road. If you think about how the Naval Weapons Station is laid out along the base of the ridge, there's a road called Bailey Road that goes from Concord to Pittsburgh. If you're going toward Pittsburgh on the right side, there's almost 1,000 acres of parkland there, and we're going to open up that first within the next 2 or 3 years. And we actually have a contract going right now to design the improvements that are going to be made there. There's going to be easy grade hiking trails. There's going to be picnic areas, shade structures, restrooms, all kinds of public facilities there, staging area, and good access from Concord. And we're real proud of that. And like I said, 2 or 3 years, the Concord will get its first regional park.
Think about this, Jared. The East Bay, and in particular, Central Contra Costa and East Contra Costa County, is a very highly developed residential group of communities. How often do you get a very large regional park and 2,500 acres of open space available, surrounded by this massive humanity? That's a really exciting concept that we have for this park. You have the whole Concord and San Ramon Valley on one side of the park, East Contra Costa on the other side of the park. And that's just a rare opportunity made available because of its history as a military base. We have all this open space. It's truly an oasis of open space and wildlife habitat, just surrounded by tens of thousands of people in nearby communities who can easily reach it and who we will assure ready access to it. And that's very exciting for us at the Park District.
I just had the experience of actually going onto the site. I recently did a tour with Tim Haler, is Contra Costa Transit Authority. They run Momentum Station, the autonomous test vehicle track that is on the old naval base. And we were able to see the vastness of how much is there. That's a stone's throw from where I live. So many people in Contra Costa pass that on a regular basis. I think it's overall 5,000 acres now. Half of that's going to be developed into 30,000 plus homes by the city of Concord, maybe eventually, hopefully in my lifetime. And the other half is going to be this park. And I think that's a great point that you were making. It is so unique at how untouched so much of that land is right here in the heart, in the middle of suburbs.
Yeah, to put it in context, think of how large San Francisco's Golden Gate Park is, right? And here we are with the park surrounded by all these communities. It's twice the size of Golden Gate Park, right here, sandwiched between Concord and Pittsburgh.
Talk about programs at the parks. What are you guys doing? There's so much that's offered for residents and open to the general public. Highlight some of the great things that are happening. What should we know that's happening across multiple parks, junior ranger programs, passport, anything, parties, pools, marathons that cut through there, trail runs, right?
Hey, what I'll recommend for your viewers and listeners, Jared, is to go to ebparks.org and then click on the drag down. It's labeled very simply activities in the park. And you'll literally be confronted on that menu with a myriad of activities throughout the park. We have 10 nature centers, visitor centers, as we call them, throughout the park system. They are staffed by 35 naturalists that are generally employed by the park district, and they are happily conducting all sorts of educational programs, many of which are designed for youth and students. And indeed, all these visitor centers are regularly visited during the school years by classroom field trips. But back to ebparks.org, if you want to pull down the activities list of choices, I'm looking at tomorrow. There's a Tilden's Tot program at the Tilden Nature Area. There's a birding and raptor study group going out to Ardenwood. There are also a program called Historic Days at Ardenwood, which is a turn of the 20th century reconstructed farm down in Fremont. There's a hike and story time at Alvarado Park in Wildcat, and a number of swimming programs at numerous lakes. There are 3,800 picnic tables placed throughout the two counties in our park system for people to just grab a picnic basket and go out and enjoy nature. It's always easy to find things to do, and they're either on your own activities or activities led by very knowledgeable and well-trained park naturalists.
And there's also the publication that gets mailed out, and it's included in many local newspapers, called Regional in Nature, which comes out every 2 months. And that has a, Colin just indicated, sample. It can show you the variety of activities you can do. You can go canoeing, you can go kayaking. We actually have a couple of islands in our collection of parks, and you're not allowed to go there unless you go with a guide, so you can go on a trip and explore those in a canoe or a kayak. We also have programs to take you into parks that are in what we call land bank status. I'm thinking of Vasco Caves, some of the parks out on the extreme eastern Contra Costa County, where they're sensitive cultural resources and natural resources. And so they're not open to the public without a guide. You can go on those trips, go where hardly anybody normally visits, and those are also great experiences too.
It just really shows how vast, right, the system is that you're talking about when you're talking about islands and the coastline and then the caves and how much you guys really cover. And it goes back to what you were talking about earlier at this unique structure of this two county, nearly 130,000 acres of parks. Within these communities, we've hit on it. You've got a lot of different people, a lot of diversity, and a lot of staff, particularly in the summer as you increase summer programs. How do you hire workers? How do you engage the communities, both from a workforce standpoint and to get them to visit the park?
It is an issue that we struggle with continuously in terms of getting access, equitable access to, especially some of our parks that are frankly a little bit difficult to get to, even though they're not that far from where the people live. And I'm thinking of some of the parks in the Berkeley and Oakland Hills. AC Transit doesn't quite run as many buses as they used to run up there. In some cases, none. And we were relying on them to do that. So I think we do have programs that get folks up there. But the thing I want to mention about access to any regional park is not all of our parks, and we've mentioned this, they're all not up in the hills and they're not all in the wilderness. They're in the city too. All those shoreline parks along the 55 miles of shoreline that we have, many of those are very close to where lots of folks live and do have transit access or do have a regional trail like the Bay Trail that serve them. And so you can walk or ride a bike there and visit those parks. And they're really not that far from where lots of folks live.
We're also always reaching out to communities throughout the two counties to make sure our workforce, as much as it possibly can, reflect the communities we serve. We've been spending significant resources in recent years to conduct regional and community recruitment activities and go to job fairs throughout the two communities. And we also reach out to existing nonprofit community groups and youth employment groups that are able to refer youth and, in fact, organize youth to undertake activities on behalf of the park district, most notably small trails crews and fire mitigation crews that we disperse throughout the two county park system to create fire breaks and thin out brush and dead trees wherever we can. The opportunity to hire a lot of young people from underserved communities in the East Bay. And we're actually really proud that we can do that, both the resources we do to the employment. Right.
How many people work for the park?
During the summer, we have over 1,000 employees because we have lifeguards and other seasonal workers. Normally, the rest of the year, it's a little under 1,000 right now.
I think the number for summer is seasonal youth employment programs. It's about 400 people between the age of 16 and 25 are hired for essentially summer programs, lifeguards and other programs. I understand the largest employer of youth in the East Bay.
And the other thing that Colin was talking about with getting some of these job programs, folks involved in working on our lands, is that's valuable training for them, which they can, if they find that they enjoy working in the outdoors, they can actually make a career at the park district. We have career ladder situations that we can plug them into, and they can start off hacking down trees to create a fire break and end up being a manager of a department. Is very possible. Like Colin was saying, we're all very proud of being able to provide those opportunities.
Thanks for sharing that. That's great to outreach, and it leads to another question. You talk about fire breaks, right? Wildfires increasingly growing in California, increasingly growing in our future. You guys have a lot of open space and a lot of wooded space in different areas. Talk to us about how you work to prevent those fires, provide access, keep homeowners safe, keep the area safe.
We're continuously maintaining what we call the urban wildland interface, maintaining it so that it is not a conduit for fire that can move into the developed area, a la the Oakland Hills fire. We're taking steps to make sure that there's something like that. We have, in the last few years, started a program to harvest dead and dying trees we're focusing right now on Anthony Chabot Regional Park and taking out dead trees, many or most of which are eucalyptus trees. And we have giant device, looks like a giant shipping container that can take whole logs of eucalyptus trees and turn them into a black product that sequesters the carbon. And this device is called the carbonizer. And it creates a product called biochar, which does not need to be hauled off to a landfill or someplace hundreds of miles away. We got several grants to perform this work, and the grants stipulate that we don't contribute to greenhouse gases by shipping this stuff away on trucks. We need to use it in our parks, and we're doing that in a number of different ways, including for agricultural applications in some places like down at Ardenwood Farm, Fremont, and maybe in some grazing areas and things like that. We're still working on what we can do with that, but that is a very innovative method that's cutting edge. And to set an example for other agencies that you don't have to cut down your trees and burn them in giant piles of dead growth. You can turn them into a useful product and not contribute greenhouse gases to the atmosphere.
With the help of the state of California and, in fact, both state and federal funding, is we're learning how to reforest large swaths of land where we've removed non-native plants, in particular eucalyptus trees, and we're now replanting those areas where we've removed dead forest, and we're planting them with native oak and native shrubs and grasses.
I like to hear the innovation, and I think people often think of just Silicon Valley as the innovation capital, which it is. I don't want to take away from that. But when you hear about the East Bay and what we're doing in transportation, from AC Transit to what we're doing at CCTA and economic development with leading the country in all the above energy future and hydrogen development, to what you're talking about, innovative ways to do a fire and repurpose lands and remove trees. We really are leading a lot of things here in the East Bay. They might be small, but they are contributing and have ripples effects throughout parks across this country. And I think that's important to highlight.
Yeah, I think the common theme is quality of life, right? We're a society in the East Bay. People who live here very much prize the quality of life that we have and we strive for and we want to preserve for future generations. And I think that is a reason we have really fantastic regional park system and trail system. Not just because, as I described earlier, the genius of the founders that created one large regional government to oversee parks and trails in the East Bay, but it's also because of the steadfast support the East Bay Park District has received from its residents in the form of voter-approved tax revenue. We, in 2008, had a measure passed by better than 70% of the vote to approve the issuance of general obligations bonds over a 20-year period that would generate about $500 million that the Park District has been able to use to acquire new lands and to build new infrastructure within these new parkland, new trails, new bridges, new bike facilities, and other educationally related facilities out in the newer parks. We really have benefited as a East Bay society by the willingness of our residents to support us with additional tax revenues beyond just their base property tax. And the result, again, is an incredible system of 130,000 acres of preserved open space and 1,300 miles of trails.
Is there anything else you want to add about the future of where you're going?
What we've touched on in terms of 2024, and it's important to the Park District and the residents of the East Bay. One, we're celebrating our 90th anniversary, but we're also embarking on a major effort toward planning for what we call the second century of the Park District. We have launched at the board level and now our Park Advisory Committee level exercises toward determining what will be the priorities for this park district for the next 10 years and then looking on into the next century. Our existing master plan has reached its shelf life, and we need to embark on this effort to create a new master plan for the future so that we can have a vision and implement that of what we want this park and trail system to look like 10 years from now and indeed 20 years from now. So both of us could probably talk about the vision for that, but it's an important facet of what we're doing this year.
And that's a process that's going to go on for probably another year or two, I would think, that based on what's happened in the past. But
Yeah.
the thing that I think that both of us would want to make sure that folks understand is that it's not going to be a top-down plan. It's going to be bottom up. So we're going to be going out into the community starting later this year, I believe, and asking for direct input from the users and the local folks. What do they want to see us doing? And how do they want us to do it? And I'm glad you asked that question, because this is a great chance for us to say, stay tuned, check the website, check the news. This is newsworthy stuff. We're going to really look for some new ideas and some new approaches to things. And while we're on that, I want to give another heads up about new areas that we're interested in preserving. Some of the folks might be aware that Alameda and Contra Costa County are the northern extent of the Diablo Range, which extends for hundreds of miles down to the south. We are going to be considering whether or not we should jump in and start helping preserve important areas of the Diablo Range. In other words, going south from Mount Diablo over Altamont Pass and down past Livermore and preserving some very important habitat and some very important wildlife corridors. We have some important partners that we work with. In this particular case, Save Mount Diablo, the Land Trust Save Mount Diablo, is also interested in this. And so we're looking forward to partnering with them on achieving preservation work down in that area too.
Fascinating. And I think please share with us how I can be involved. And I'd love to talk further about how we can help share that and spread the word to our listeners, but also to my neighbors in the community. I got to ask, love to take my kids to the lakes, to the parks. Why does blue algae keep popping up? Why do things like Lake Anza, and there's probably 5 others, keep closing? I know there's a safety thing, but how do we prevent that? How do we clean it out and open those lakes back up?
Yeah, there's a scientific answer. It doesn't help you very much, but it's an overabundance of nitrogen and phosphorus.
Yeah, how do you remove it and keep it out?
It's not just our issue. It impacts us, and it impacts us heavily because we are very focused on our lake facilities and the importance of access. We've talked about shoreline, but the lakes as well. We have communities that otherwise don't really have very good outdoor access to beaches and areas to swim or to fish. I remember as a kid growing up in Orinda, we didn't have a pool. We used to drive through the Caldecott when I was a young teenager and go to Lake Temescal to get cool on very hot days. The idea that Temescal and Anza up in Tilden are more and more frequently closed for some period of time because of the blue-green algae blooms is really distressing to us. It's an issue where we are, as a board, constantly asking for feedback from our staff on what's going on, what's causing this, what can we deal with it. And innovation is part of what we're doing. It's an issue throughout the West, throughout landowners, land operators throughout the West who deal with lakes and other waterways are having to deal with the issue as well. And so we look elsewhere, and we also experiment on our time. It seems to be the key to the problem in the short term is oxygenation. It is a process of using machinery, and we've done this both at Anza and at Temescal, where we have devices that force oxygen in the lower levels of the lakes and get it to mix up with existing water flows as water flows in and out of the lake. That seems to help. But what the science is telling us in the long term, especially with global warming and going between period heavy rainfalls and then periods of drought that result in more and more residues, urban residues, suburban residues into these lakes, that we need to fundamentally deal with the issue by deepening them, by dredging. That appears to be the most effective long-term remedy for both these lakes. Unfortunately, it's also extraordinarily expensive, both the process of dredging and disposing of the dirt that is removed from the lake. But we learn there's also an issue that we're facing in the long term of having lakes that are really old reservoirs. I'm thinking of Jewel Lake up in Tilden, and our study of that lake has resulted in several options, which include just restoring it to what it originally was, which was a creek flowing through Tilden Park. There are some remedies to the issues that we're dealing with that have been basically looked at what was there in nature originally. It's complicated, and that's a complicated response to your question.
A good worthwhile effort. So I appreciate that you and the staff are paying attention to the impacts that has on your residents. And it just shows how much you guys care about the complex issues. What's your hidden gem? Maybe Colin and then John, before we wrap up here in a few minutes. There's a ton of hidden gems out there just by the names of the parks, but what are some of your favorite activities that you want to call attention to?
I personally don't have one hidden gem, very vast system. I can relate perhaps what I talk about when my wife Mila and I are out in the communities at various fairs. We're going to be doing the Beaver Festival coming up this weekend in Martinez. I do that every year. We've been doing it for 10 years. And we're going to have a table. We're going to have our mobile visitor center. We're going to have the mobile aquarium, playing native fish. It's a lot of fun. But what I end up talking about at these tabling events that I participate in is I talk a lot about activities that folks aren't otherwise really well aware of. I think anyone who grew up in Contra Costa in particular knows how wonderful it is to take kids up to Tilden Park and ride merry-go-round, ride the steam train, visit the nature center and Little Farm, and the programming out there in the Tilden Nature Center, nature area. I like to talk about the George Miller Trail up in the Carquinez Strait. If I'm doing a table and I see a young couple going by with a stroller, it's terrible what I do. I jump up, I run up to them, and I hand them a map of the Carquinez Strait. And I say, you got to go over to the George Miller Trail and try baby strolling up on that trail. It's a 2-mile trail between Port Costa and Martinez. It's very well paved. Its grade is relatively even, and the views of the Carquinez Strait are to die for. That's very much a hidden gem because a lot of people don't know about the George Miller Trail and taking in those views. I also stress to couples with kids, or actually just grown-ups generally, we have this magnificent facility out at Black Diamond Mine. It's called the Hazel Atlas Mine. It was a sand mine that closed in the 1940s. We weren't able to restore coal mines. They're toxic. We were able to restore a sand mine, and we have tours basically every weekend of the Hazel Atlas Mine. It's a wonderful experience. When I see the kids walking by a table, I come up to the kids and I say, hey, have you ever been in a hollow mountain? And the kids say, what? Really? But it is the hollow mountain. It was sandstone that was hollowed out of that mountain to be shipped down to Oakland for a glassmaking company. And it's a wonderful experience, not all that well known. Also at Black Diamond, we have the coal mine experience where, because we cannot open coal mine and give folks that historic experience. We recreated with the help of very high-tech exhibit designers. We recreated a coal mine out of a sand mine. It's called the Coal Mine Experience. It's, again, under activity, both at ebparks.org and in our regional and nature publication. Look for the Coal Mine Experience, again, mostly on weekends. It's a great tour for adults and family. Those are mine.
The one that comes to mind for me is interesting because I know you're familiar with this area, Jared. A lot of people know about Castle Rock Park, way out at the end of Oak Grove Road, Castle Rock Road, and Walnut Creek. That's been around for many years, and lots of folks like to walk through that park and keep going, and they go up the canyon and they're wading through the creek and jumping over on the rocks and such. But I get the feeling that a lot of people don't realize that if you go to the right when you first park your car and go up the hill, and there's some steep trails there, but once you get up in there, there's beautiful views of Mount Diablo and the Castle Rock formations. And it's something that I never get tired of. And there's a very good trail network there, which, by the way, also connects with Shell Ridge, which is a Walnut Creek open space, and then Mount Diablo, which is the state of California. They're all connected with Diablo Foothills right in the middle there. So Diablo Foothills, that's the one that's basically hiding in plain sight right there. But close to that, though, I want to put in a plug for the regional trails that we have in central Contra Costa County, especially certain portions of them, with the Lafayette Moraga Trail, the Iron Horse Trail, and the Contra Costa Canal Trail are tremendous resources for really very long bicycle rides or walks where you don't have to worry about dealing with cars, and you can exercise, you can observe the wild. There's actually wildlife in the canal. There's otters there sometimes, ducks, all kinds of things. Those regional trails are a wonderful resource. And I know a lot of people already know about them, but I suspect there's a lot of people that don't. And if they went out there and they spent some time walking or riding, they'd be really amazed. And I suspect you're going to ask us about the future. I want to put in a plug that we are working hard to extend the Iron Horse Trail all the way to the Benicia Bridge, so that you'll be able to pass all the way through Contra Costa County from north to south on a separated bike ped trail. And we're actually working on that. So stay tuned, folks. There's a great future out there for recreating on regional trails and parks.
Amazing. So much that you guys offer. I know we're going a little long to our listeners, but last question, is there anything else I should be asking? Anything else you want people to take away from this?
Point that touched on, and John certainly has, is to stay tuned and be aware of when there will be opportunities to contribute to our planning for the next century. They will be in the form of community meetings at sites throughout the two counties. In terms of my region, I can see a community input session on the next century plan taking place out at the Big Break Visitor Center in Oakley. Certainly in Central County, John can envision some of the meetings that will take place there in West Contra Costa and Oakland, Pleasanton, Dublin, Fremont. Throughout the two counties are planners, the folks who design parks, trails, and give some thought to future development of both. They will be conducting these meetings along with we on the board of directors to invite people to tell us, looking forward 10 years, 15 years, what do you want to see out of this park system that we have here in the East?
Colin and John, board of directors members from the East Bay Regional Parks District, thank you for joining me on today's Capstone Conversation. Wait, don't leave yet. Hit subscribe. Make sure you get the weekly updates. We have a new episode every Wednesday for stuff happening in the East Bay. In the meantime, follow me on LinkedIn, Jared Asch, or check out our firm where we have a weekly newsletter and blog at Capstone Government Affairs on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today on the Capstone Conversation.